The yellowed pages emerged from a water-damaged trunk in the basement of the demolished Hartwell residence, discovered during excavation work in October 2019. County historian Margaret Thornfield immediately recognized the significance of the handwritten documents, their careful script betraying the educated hand of someone documenting events with methodical precision. The papers bore the letterhead of Dr. Edmund Blackwood, a physician who practiced in rural Indiana during the early 20th century. Among the collection were medical notes, personal correspondence, and what appeared to be a detailed account of events that transpired during the harsh winter of 1918. The documents had been carefully preserved in oiled cloth, suggesting their author understood their potential historical importance. Each page was numbered and dated, creating a chronological record that spanned several months of increasingly disturbing observations. Dr. Blackwood's reputation in Whitmore County had been exemplary until his sudden departure in spring 1919, leaving behind a thriving practice and unanswered questions. Local records indicated he had been called to attend the Hartwell family during a period of unusual illness that had baffled other medical practitioners. His notes revealed a man of science struggling to reconcile his rational worldview with phenomena that defied conventional explanation. The Hartwell family had been prominent landowners in the region, their farm spanning nearly 300 acres of fertile soil along the Wabash River. Thomas Hartwell and his wife Eleanor had built their reputation on hard work and community involvement, regularly hosting church gatherings and harvest celebrations. Their 3 children, Margaret, aged 16, Samuel, 14, and young Catherine, merely 8, were known throughout the county for their exemplary behavior and academic achievements. The first entry in Dr. Blackwood's journal was dated November 15, 1918, describing his initial summons to the Hartwell property. The physician noted unusual circumstances surrounding the call, mentioning that multiple family members had fallen ill simultaneously, with symptoms that did not conform to any recognized medical condition. His initial assessment suggested possible exposure to contaminated water or spoiled grain, common causes of family-wide illness in rural communities. However, subsequent entries revealed a growing concern as traditional treatments proved ineffective and the patient's conditions deteriorated in ways that challenged medical understanding. Dr. Blackwood's careful documentation included detailed observations of physical symptoms, behavioral changes, and environmental factors that might contribute to the family's declining health. His scientific approach gradually gave way to uncertainty as conventional diagnoses failed to explain the mounting evidence. The physician's notes also reference consultations with colleagues in Indianapolis and Chicago, seeking second opinions on cases that seemed to defy rational explanation. Letters included in the collection revealed growing frustration among the medical community as respected practitioners encountered phenomena that challenged their fundamental understanding of human physiology and psychology. The correspondence painted a picture of professional men grappling with forces beyond their comprehension. Local church records, discovered alongside Dr. Blackwood's papers, provided additional context for the events that unfolded during that terrible winter. Reverend Joshua Whitmore had documented unusual occurrences in his parish, including reports of strange sounds emanating from the Hartwell property and disturbing changes in the family's attendance at Sunday services. His careful notes suggested growing concern within the religious community about the nature of the family's affliction. The historical significance of these documents extends beyond their immediate narrative, offering insight into rural American life during a period of great social upheaval. The year 1918 had brought unprecedented challenges to communities across the nation, from the devastating influenza pandemic to the ongoing effects of the Great War. Against this backdrop of uncertainty and fear, the events at the Hartwell farm took on additional significance for a community already stretched to its limits. As historians continue to examine these remarkable documents, questions remain about the ultimate fate of the Hartwell family and the circumstances surrounding Dr. Blackwood's abrupt departure from Whitmore County. The physician's final entries suggest events that would challenge even the most open-minded observer, leaving readers to draw their own conclusions about the nature of the forces that converged on that isolated farm during the winter of 1918. Dr. Edmund Blackwood's carriage approached the Hartwell property through a landscape transformed by an unusually early winter. The November snow creating an ethereal silence that seemed to muffle even the sound of his horse's hooves. His journal entry for that day described an immediate sense of unease as he observed the absence of normal farm activity, noting that livestock appeared agitated and the usual sounds of rural life were conspicuously absent. The physician had practiced in rural Indiana for nearly 2 decades, yet something about the Hartwell farm struck him as fundamentally wrong. The farmhouse itself appeared well maintained from the exterior, its white clapboard siding and green shutters presenting the image of prosperous rural domesticity that characterized successful farming families throughout the region. However, Dr. Blackwood noted subtle details that suggested underlying distress: curtains drawn tightly against the afternoon light, an unusual accumulation of mail on the front porch, and the absence of smoke from the kitchen chimney despite the approaching dinner hour. These observations, carefully recorded in his methodical handwriting, would prove prophetic of the mysteries that lay within. Thomas Hartwell met the physician at the front door, his appearance immediately concerning to Dr. Blackwood's trained eye. The farmer, typically robust and energetic, appeared gaunt and hollow-eyed, his clothes hanging loosely on a frame that seemed to have lost considerable weight in a remarkably short period. His manner was nervous and distracted, frequently glancing over his shoulder as though expecting some unseen presence to materialize behind him. The physician noted that Hartwell's hands trembled noticeably as he gestured toward the interior of the house. Eleanor Hartwell's condition proved even more alarming upon examination, her once vibrant demeanor replaced by a listless apathy that concerned Dr. Blackwood more than any physical symptom. She lay in the master bedroom, conscious but unresponsive to most stimuli, her eyes fixed on some distant point beyond the ceiling, as though observing events invisible to others. Her pulse was weak but regular, her breathing shallow, and her skin possessed an unusual pallor that suggested prolonged confinement, despite the family's outdoor lifestyle. The physician's attempts at conversation yielded only monosyllabic responses delivered in a monotone voice. The children presented the most puzzling aspects of the case, each displaying symptoms that seemed to defy conventional medical understanding while following no recognizable pattern of disease progression. Margaret, the eldest, alternated between periods of complete lucidity and episodes of apparent delirium, during which she spoke in languages that her father insisted she had never learned. Samuel remained largely catatonic, responding only to direct physical contact and then with violent recoiling, as though touch caused him physical pain. Young Catherine appeared the least affected physically, but demonstrated behavioral changes that deeply disturbed her parents. Dr. Blackwood's initial examination revealed no obvious signs of infectious disease, poisoning, or physical trauma that might explain the family's collective condition. Their vital signs, while weakened, remained within acceptable ranges, and none displayed the characteristic symptoms of influenza or other common ailments affecting the region during that period. The physician's growing perplexity was evident in his notes, which documented his systematic elimination of potential diagnoses while acknowledging his inability to identify the underlying cause of their affliction. The household's atmosphere struck Dr. Blackwood as oppressive in ways that transcended the obvious concern for the family's health, creating an environment that seemed to drain energy from visitors and residents alike. He noted unusual temperature variations throughout the house, with some rooms remaining uncomfortably cold despite adequate heating, while others felt stifling without apparent cause. The physician also documented strange acoustic phenomena, including sounds that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves and voices that could be heard but never clearly understood. Thomas Hartwell's account of the illness's onset proved frustratingly vague, with the farmer unable to pinpoint exactly when the symptoms first appeared or identify any precipitating events that might have triggered the family's decline. He spoke of gradual changes in behavior and health that had accelerated dramatically in recent weeks, transforming his once happy household into something he no longer recognized. His descriptions suggested a progressive deterioration that had affected each family member differently, while following no logical medical progression. The physician's professional instincts urged him to recommend immediate hospitalization for the entire family. Yet practical considerations made such action impossible, given the limited medical facilities available in rural Indiana during that period. Instead, Dr. Blackwood resolved to monitor the family's condition closely while consulting with colleagues who might offer insight into their unusual presentation. His notes from that first visit concluded with an admission of professional uncertainty that would characterize his entire involvement with the Hartwell case. As evening approached and Dr. Blackwood prepared to return to town, he experienced what he described as an overwhelming reluctance to leave the family alone in their current condition. The physician's final observations of that day included references to an indefinable sense of presence within the house, as though unseen observers monitored every movement and conversation. This feeling, which he initially attributed to stress and concern for his patients, would intensify with each subsequent visit to the Hartwell farm. The second week of Dr. Blackwood's involvement with the Hartwell family brought a marked deterioration in their condition that defied his growing experience with unusual medical cases. His journal entries from this period reflected increasing concern, as traditional treatments proved not only ineffective, but seemed to exacerbate the mysterious symptoms affecting each family member. The physician noted that his presence in the house appeared to trigger intensified episodes, as though his medical interventions somehow disturbed whatever force was affecting the family's health and behavior. Margaret Hartwell's linguistic episodes had become more frequent and elaborate, with the 16-year-old girl speaking fluently in what appeared to be Latin, Greek, and other classical languages during her periods of altered consciousness. Dr. Blackwood, educated at Harvard Medical School and familiar with classical texts, recognized portions of ancient religious and philosophical works being recited with perfect pronunciation and understanding. The girl's father insisted she had received only basic education appropriate for a farmer's daughter, making her sudden scholarly eloquence inexplicable through conventional means. Young Samuel's catatonic periods had given way to violent episodes during which the 14-year-old boy displayed strength that seemed impossible for his slight frame and weakened condition. Dr. Blackwood documented instances where it required 3 grown men to restrain the child during his fits, noting that Samuel's eyes remained completely vacant throughout these struggles, as though his consciousness had been entirely displaced. Between episodes, the boy remained completely unresponsive, requiring assistance with basic functions while showing no recognition of family members or familiar surroundings. Catherine, the youngest at 8 years old, had begun exhibiting knowledge of events and people she could not possibly have encountered through normal means. The child spoke casually of deceased relatives she had never met, describing their physical appearance and personal habits with uncanny accuracy that disturbed her parents profoundly. Dr. Blackwood verified several of these descriptions through conversations with older community members, confirming details that the child could not have learned through conventional sources. Eleanor Hartwell's condition had progressed from listless apathy to complete withdrawal from external reality, her consciousness apparently focused entirely on internal experiences that remained inaccessible to observation or medical intervention. The physician noted that she occasionally responded to stimuli that were not present, engaging in one-sided conversations with invisible participants while ignoring actual people in the room. Her physical health continued to decline despite adequate nutrition and medical care, suggesting that whatever was affecting her operated beyond the realm of conventional medicine. Thomas Hartwell himself had begun displaying symptoms that concerned Dr. Blackwood almost as much as his family's more dramatic presentations. The farmer reported persistent insomnia, accompanied by vivid nightmares that seemed to continue even after waking, creating a state of constant exhaustion that affected his ability to care for his family or maintain the farm. He described hearing voices calling his name from empty rooms and seeing movement in his peripheral vision that vanished when he turned to investigate. The physician's attempts to involve other medical professionals had met with limited success, as colleagues who visited the Hartwell farm invariably left with excuses about pressing obligations elsewhere. Dr. Blackwood noted that even the most dedicated physicians seemed reluctant to return after their initial consultations, offering vague explanations about the case being beyond their expertise. This pattern of avoidance among his professional peers added to the physician's growing isolation as he struggled to understand and treat the family's condition. Environmental factors within the house had become increasingly disturbing, with Dr. Blackwood documenting temperature fluctuations that seemed to follow no logical pattern related to heating systems or weather conditions. Certain rooms would become unbearably cold without warning, while others maintained tropical warmth that left visitors perspiring despite winter weather outside. The physician also noted that timepieces throughout the house had begun keeping erratic time, with some clocks running fast while others slowed or stopped entirely without mechanical explanation. The acoustic phenomena that Dr. Blackwood had initially dismissed as products of an old house settling had intensified into clearly audible voices, footsteps, and other sounds that seemed to emanate from within the walls themselves. These disturbances occurred most frequently during his medical examinations, as though his presence triggered increased activity from whatever forces were affecting the family. The physician's scientific training compelled him to seek rational explanations, yet his careful observations yielded no conventional answers. Local community members had begun avoiding the Hartwell property entirely, with neighbors who had previously maintained close relationships with the family now crossing themselves when passing the farm and refusing to discuss the situation with Dr. Blackwood. This social isolation compounded the family's medical crisis, leaving them dependent entirely on the physician's care while cutting them off from the support network that typically sustained rural families during times of crisis. The growing atmosphere of fear and superstition surrounding the case would soon force Dr. Blackwood to seek assistance from sources beyond the medical community. Dr. Blackwood's medical training had instilled in him a profound respect for scientific methodology and rational analysis. Yet the Hartwell family's condition continued to defy every conventional explanation he could devise. His journal entries from early December 1918 revealed a man of science grappling with phenomena that challenged his fundamental understanding of reality, leading him to consider possibilities he would have dismissed as superstition mere weeks earlier. The physician's growing desperation was evident in his decision to consult with religious authorities, a step that represented a significant departure from his typically secular approach to medical practice. Reverend Joshua Whitmore had served the local Methodist congregation for over 15 years, earning respect throughout Whitmore County for his thoughtful sermons and practical approach to spiritual guidance. When Dr. Blackwood approached him about the Hartwell situation, The minister's initial response reflected the same skepticism that had characterized the physician's early involvement with the case. However, Reverend Whitmore's pastoral duties had brought him into contact with other unusual occurrences in the community, creating a pattern of disturbances that seemed to center on the Hartwell farm. The minister's first visit to the property occurred on December 8, 1918, accompanied by Dr. Blackwood and documented in both men's personal records. Reverend Whitmore's account described an immediate sense of spiritual oppression upon entering the house, as though the very atmosphere resisted his presence and challenged his faith. The clergyman noted that his usual prayers seemed to echo strangely within the rooms, creating acoustic effects that made familiar words sound foreign and threatening. Margaret Hartwell's reaction to the minister's presence proved particularly disturbing, with the young woman becoming agitated and speaking in what Reverend Whitmore recognized as corrupted Latin liturgical phrases. Her recitations included passages from religious texts that had been deliberately inverted or altered in ways that suggested intimate knowledge of sacred writings, combined with deliberate blasphemy. The minister's attempts to engage her in prayer were met with increasingly violent responses that required physical restraint to prevent injury to herself and others. The spiritual assessment conducted by Reverend Whitmore revealed what he described as evidence of malevolent supernatural influence affecting the entire household. His theological training had included study of historical accounts of demonic possession and spiritual warfare, providing him with a framework for understanding phenomena that Dr. Blackwood's medical education could not adequately address. The minister's observations suggested that the Hartwell family was experiencing something far beyond conventional illness, requiring intervention that transcended the boundaries of traditional medical practice. Samuel's response to religious symbols and prayers provided additional evidence supporting Reverend Whitmore's spiritual diagnosis, with the boy displaying violent aversion to crosses, Bibles, and other sacred objects that had previously held no significance for him. The minister noted that the child's episodes intensified dramatically when exposed to holy water or religious music, suggesting a supernatural sensitivity that confirmed his worst suspicions about the nature of the family's affliction. These reactions occurred even when Samuel appeared completely unconscious, indicating that whatever was affecting him operated beyond normal psychological processes. Eleanor Hartwell's condition presented the most complex challenge for spiritual intervention, as her withdrawal from external reality made traditional pastoral care nearly impossible. Reverend Whitmore observed that she seemed aware of his presence on some level, occasionally turning toward him during prayers with expressions of desperate pleading that suggested her consciousness remained trapped within whatever force was controlling her behavior. The minister's attempts to reach her through familiar hymns and scriptures produced subtle responses that encouraged continued effort despite the apparent futility of conventional approaches. The consultation between Dr. Blackwood and Reverend Whitmore resulted in a decision to seek additional expertise from religious authorities with specific experience in cases of suspected supernatural influence. The minister's correspondence with the Episcopal Diocese in Indianapolis yielded a recommendation for Father Michael O'Sullivan, an Irish priest whose reputation for dealing with unusual spiritual phenomena had earned him recognition throughout the Midwest. The priest's willingness to travel to rural Indiana during winter weather demonstrated his understanding of the situation's urgency. Thomas Hartwell's initial resistance to spiritual intervention reflected his practical nature and skepticism about supernatural explanations for his family's condition. However, the farmer's desperation had reached a point where he was willing to consider any approach that might restore his loved ones to health and normalcy. His consent to religious involvement marked a significant turning point in the case, opening the door to methods that operated outside the realm of conventional medicine while acknowledging the limitations of purely scientific approaches. The community's reaction to news of impending spiritual intervention revealed deep divisions between those who supported the family's desperate search for help and others who viewed such measures as dangerous superstition that might attract unwanted attention from malevolent forces. Local gossip suggested that some residents blamed the Hartwell family for bringing whatever was affecting them into the community, creating an atmosphere of fear and suspicion that further isolated the suffering household from potential sources of support and comfort. Father Michael O'Sullivan arrived at the Whitmore County train station on December 18, 1918, his imposing figure immediately distinguishing him from the typical travelers who passed through the rural Indiana community. Dr. Blackwood's journal described the priest as a man in his 50s, bearing the weathered features of someone who had witnessed humanity's darkest struggles while maintaining an aura of unshakable faith that seemed to emanate from his very presence. The Irish clergyman's reputation for dealing with supernatural phenomena had preceded him, creating both hope and apprehension among those familiar with the Hartwell situation. The priest's initial consultation with Dr. Blackwood and Reverend Whitmore took place in the physician's office, where Father O'Sullivan reviewed the extensive documentation that had accumulated during the 2 months since the family's condition first manifested. His examination of the medical records revealed a trained mind capable of distinguishing between psychological disorders and genuine supernatural influence, drawing upon decades of experience with cases that challenged conventional understanding. The priest's questions demonstrated intimate knowledge of symptoms and progressions that suggested familiarity with similar situations throughout his ecclesiastical career. Father O'Sullivan's theological assessment of the Hartwell case drew upon extensive study of historical accounts of demonic possession and spiritual warfare dating back to the early Christian church. His personal library, which had accompanied him from Ireland, contained texts that documented centuries of encounters between religious authorities and malevolent supernatural forces. The priest's scholarly approach to the situation provided a framework for understanding phenomena that had baffled both medical and religious practitioners, offering hope for intervention based on established spiritual principles. The clergyman's first visit to the Hartwell property occurred on December 20, 1918, under circumstances that Dr. Blackwood described as ominous despite the clear winter weather and peaceful rural setting. Father O'Sullivan's immediate reaction upon entering the house confirmed the worst fears of those who had been monitoring the family's condition, with the priest recognizing signs of supernatural influence that matched patterns documented in his extensive case files. His preliminary assessment suggested that the Hartwell family was experiencing a form of spiritual attack that required immediate and decisive intervention. Margaret Hartwell's response to Father O'Sullivan's presence proved dramatically different from her reactions to previous visitors, with the young woman displaying immediate recognition of the priest's authority and purpose. Her linguistic episodes intensified in both frequency and complexity, incorporating religious phrases from multiple traditions while maintaining the blasphemous inversions that had characterized her earlier utterances. The priest's careful observation of her behavior revealed patterns consistent with cases of genuine possession rather than psychological disorders or medical conditions. Samuel's violent episodes reached new levels of intensity during Father O'Sullivan's examination, requiring the combined efforts of Dr. Blackwood, Reverend Whitmore, and Thomas Hartwell to prevent the boy from injuring himself or others. The priest noted that the child's strength seemed to fluctuate in direct response to religious interventions, suggesting that whatever was controlling his behavior possessed intelligence and awareness of spiritual opposition. These observations supported Father O'Sullivan's growing conviction that the family was dealing with malevolent entities rather than natural phenomena. Eleanor Hartwell's condition presented unique challenges for spiritual assessment, as her withdrawal from external reality made traditional diagnostic methods nearly impossible. However, Father O'Sullivan's experience with similar cases enabled him to recognize subtle signs of spiritual distress that had escaped previous observers. The priest's attempts to reach her through Latin prayers produced responses that suggested her consciousness remained intact despite apparent catatonia, indicating that appropriate spiritual intervention might still prove effective. Catherine's precocious knowledge of deceased relatives and historical events provided Father O'Sullivan with additional evidence supporting his supernatural diagnosis, particularly when the child began describing religious ceremonies and practices from centuries past with accuracy that exceeded scholarly understanding. The priest's questioning revealed that the 8-year-old possessed detailed knowledge of medieval liturgical practices and theological concepts that would challenge university-trained theologians. This impossible erudition convinced Father O'Sullivan that external intelligences were using the child as a conduit for communication. The environmental phenomena that had puzzled Dr. Blackwood took on new significance under Father O'Sullivan's experienced observation, with the priest recognizing patterns of supernatural manifestation that followed established precedents from historical cases. Temperature fluctuations, acoustic disturbances, and temporal anomalies all corresponded to documented signs of demonic presence, providing a framework for understanding events that had seemed random and inexplicable. The priest's ability to interpret these phenomena offered hope that appropriate countermeasures might prove effective. Father O'Sullivan's preliminary assessment concluded that the Hartwell family was experiencing a coordinated supernatural attack that required formal exorcism procedures to resolve. His recommendation for immediate intervention reflected both the severity of the situation and his confidence in established religious methods for combating such influences. The priest's willingness to undertake such a serious spiritual battle demonstrated his conviction that the family's suffering could be alleviated through proper application of ecclesiastical authority and divine intervention. The decision to proceed with formal exorcism procedures required extensive preparation that tested the resolve of everyone involved in the Hartwell case. Father O'Sullivan's experience with similar situations had taught him that success depended not only on proper spiritual preparation, but also on careful attention to practical details that could determine the outcome of such a serious undertaking. His requirements for the procedure included specific religious artifacts, detailed documentation of all participants, and establishment of secure conditions that would protect both the family and those attempting to help them. Dr. Blackwood's role in the upcoming exorcism presented unique challenges that forced him to reconcile his scientific training with acceptance of supernatural realities that contradicted his fundamental understanding of the world. The physician's journal entries from this period revealed a man struggling to maintain professional objectivity while acknowledging phenomena that defied rational explanation. His medical expertise would prove essential for monitoring the family's physical condition during what Father O'Sullivan warned could be an extremely demanding ordeal for everyone involved. Reverend Whitmore's participation in the exorcism required him to confront theological questions that had remained largely academic throughout his pastoral career. The Methodist minister's cooperation with Catholic ritual practices represented a significant departure from denominational traditions. Yet the severity of the Hartwell situation demanded ecumenical collaboration that transcended normal religious boundaries. His local knowledge and established relationship with the family would provide crucial support during what promised to be an emotionally and spiritually devastating experience. Thomas Hartwell's consent to the exorcism procedures reflected his desperate willingness to attempt any intervention that might restore his family to health and normalcy. The farmer's practical nature had initially resisted supernatural explanations for his loved one's condition, yet months of deterioration had convinced him that conventional approaches offered no hope for recovery. His agreement to participate in religious rituals that challenged his fundamental beliefs demonstrated the depth of his commitment to saving his family regardless of personal cost. The physical preparations for exorcism required transformation of the Hartwell farmhouse into a sacred space capable of containing whatever spiritual forces might be unleashed during the procedure. Father O'Sullivan's specifications included removal of all mirrors and reflective surfaces, installation of multiple crucifixes and religious images, and establishment of blessed salt barriers at all entrances and windows. These measures, drawn from centuries of ecclesiastical experience with supernatural phenomena, were designed to create a protected environment where divine authority could operate without interference. Spiritual preparation for the exorcism involved intensive prayer and fasting by all participants, creating the proper mental and emotional state necessary for confronting malevolent supernatural forces. Father O'Sullivan's guidance emphasized the importance of absolute faith and unwavering commitment to the procedure, warning that any doubt or hesitation could provide opportunities for the entities affecting the family to resist or counterattack. The priest's own preparation included confession, communion, and extended meditation designed to strengthen his spiritual authority for the coming battle. The timing of the exorcism was carefully calculated to coincide with religious observances that would maximize spiritual power while minimizing potential interference from opposing forces. Father O'Sullivan selected the period between Christmas and New Year as optimal for such intervention, drawing upon the sacred nature of the season to enhance the effectiveness of religious rituals. The priest's scheduling also considered practical factors, such as weather conditions and community activities, that might affect the procedure's success or secrecy. Documentation requirements for the exorcism reflected both ecclesiastical protocols and Dr. Blackwood's scientific approach to unusual phenomena. Father O'Sullivan insisted on detailed records of all events, participants, and outcomes to provide evidence for church authorities who would review the case and determine its canonical significance. The physician's medical training complemented these requirements by ensuring accurate observation and recording of physical symptoms and responses throughout the procedure. Security measures for the exorcism addressed concerns about community reaction and potential interference from curiosity seekers or those opposed to such spiritual intervention. The isolated location of the Hartwell farm provided natural protection from unwanted observers, while careful coordination among participants ensured that news of the procedure would not spread beyond those directly involved. Father O'Sullivan's experience had taught him that publicity could attract both helpful and harmful attention that might compromise the exorcism's effectiveness. The final preparations for exorcism included contingency planning for various outcomes, ranging from complete success to partial resolution or even failure of the spiritual intervention. Father O'Sullivan's realistic assessment of the situation acknowledged that not all cases of supernatural influence could be resolved through religious means, requiring backup plans that might include relocation of the family or alternative forms of spiritual protection. These sobering considerations reflected the priest's understanding that they were about to confront forces whose power and intentions remained largely unknown, despite months of careful observation and analysis. The exorcism of the Hartwell family commenced at sunset on December 28, 1918, as Father O'Sullivan began the ancient Latin rituals that had been used by the Catholic Church for centuries to combat supernatural evil. Dr. Blackwood's detailed documentation of the procedure provided a scientific observer's perspective on events that challenged every assumption about the nature of reality and the limits of human understanding. The physician's medical training enabled him to monitor vital signs and physical responses while maintaining careful records of phenomena that defied conventional explanation. Margaret Hartwell's reaction to the opening prayers was immediate and violent, with the 16-year-old girl displaying strength that required multiple restraints to prevent injury to herself and others. Her vocalizations during this phase included languages that Father O'Sullivan recognized as ancient Aramaic and Hebrew, spoken with fluency that would have challenged biblical scholars while incorporating blasphemous content that revealed intimate knowledge of sacred texts. The priest's responses followed established protocols for such manifestations, maintaining steady recitation of exorcism prayers despite increasingly disturbing interruptions. Samuel's participation in the supernatural drama proved equally dramatic, with the 14-year-old boy alternating between catatonic withdrawal and explosive violence that seemed to respond directly to Father O'Sullivan's spiritual interventions. Dr. Blackwood noted that the child's pulse and respiration fluctuated wildly during religious recitations, suggesting physiological responses to spiritual stimuli that operated beyond normal medical understanding. The boy's eyes remained vacant throughout these episodes, indicating that his consciousness had been displaced by whatever forces were controlling his behavior. Eleanor Hartwell's condition during the exorcism presented the most complex challenge for those attempting to help her, as her withdrawal from external reality made it difficult to assess the effectiveness of spiritual intervention. However, Father O'Sullivan's experienced observation detected subtle responses to specific prayers and religious symbols that suggested her consciousness remained trapped within whatever supernatural influence was affecting her. The priest's persistence in attempting to reach her through familiar hymns and scriptures gradually produced more pronounced reactions that encouraged continued effort. Catherine's role in the supernatural manifestations proved particularly disturbing as the 8-year-old child began speaking in the voices of deceased individuals while demonstrating knowledge of historical events and personal details that she could not possibly have acquired through normal means. Father O'Sullivan recognized several of these personalities as individuals who had died in states of spiritual distress, suggesting that the child was serving as a conduit for earthbound souls seeking resolution of unfinished business. The priest's attempts to address these entities directly produced responses that confirmed their supernatural nature. The environmental phenomena that had characterized the Hartwell house intensified dramatically during the exorcism, with temperature fluctuations becoming so extreme that participants required frequent breaks to avoid hypothermia or heat exhaustion. Dr. Blackwood documented acoustic disturbances that included voices speaking in multiple languages simultaneously, creating a cacophony that made communication difficult and added to the psychological stress of an already demanding situation. These manifestations seemed designed to disrupt the exorcism procedure and test the resolve of those attempting to help the family. Thomas Hartwell's participation in his family's spiritual liberation required him to witness transformations in his loved ones that challenged his fundamental understanding of their nature and identity. The farmer's journal entries, discovered among Dr. Blackwood's papers, revealed a man struggling to reconcile the people he had known and loved with the entities that seemed to have taken possession of their bodies and minds. His faith in the exorcism procedure wavered repeatedly as he watched his children and wife subjected to spiritual forces that seemed determined to destroy them. Father O'Sullivan's conduct of the exorcism followed established ecclesiastical protocols while adapting to unique circumstances that required improvisation based on decades of experience with supernatural phenomena. The priest's authority and confidence provided stability for other participants as they witnessed events that challenged their fundamental beliefs about the nature of reality. His ability to maintain focus and determination despite increasingly disturbing manifestations demonstrated the spiritual strength necessary for such demanding work. The climax of the exorcism occurred near midnight, when all family members simultaneously exhibited violent reactions to Father O'Sullivan's final prayers, creating a coordinated supernatural response that suggested intelligent direction of the forces affecting them. Dr. Blackwood's medical monitoring revealed synchronized physiological changes that indicated some form of communication or control, operating beyond normal human capabilities. The intensity of these manifestations tested the limits of everyone's endurance while providing dramatic evidence of the supernatural nature of the family's affliction. The conclusion of the exorcism brought sudden and complete cessation of all supernatural phenomena, leaving the Hartwell family in a state of apparent normal sleep that contrasted sharply with months of disturbed behavior and declining health. Father O'Sullivan's exhaustion was evident as he completed the final prayers and blessings designed to protect the family from future supernatural interference. However, the priest's experience warned him that apparent success in such cases could be temporary, requiring continued vigilance and spiritual protection to ensure lasting resolution of the supernatural crisis. The immediate aftermath of the exorcism brought a period of apparent normalcy to the Hartwell household that seemed almost miraculous after months of supernatural terror and declining health. Dr. Blackwood's medical examinations revealed that all family members had returned to normal vital signs and physical condition, with no evidence of the mysterious symptoms that had baffled medical practitioners throughout the ordeal. However, the physician's experience with unusual cases made him cautious about declaring complete success, recognizing that supernatural influences could return without warning if proper precautions were not maintained. Margaret Hartwell's recovery appeared complete, with the 16-year-old girl displaying no memory of her linguistic episodes or the disturbing knowledge she had demonstrated during her possession. Her return to normal teenage behavior and interests provided relief for her parents. Yet Dr. Blackwood noted subtle changes in her personality that suggested the experience had left permanent marks on her psyche. The girl's reluctance to discuss the events and her tendency to avoid religious topics indicated psychological trauma that might require ongoing attention despite her apparent physical recovery. Samuel's restoration to normal behavior was equally dramatic, with the 14-year-old boy resuming his typical activities and interests as though the months of catatonia and violence had never occurred. His complete lack of memory regarding the supernatural events provided additional evidence that external forces had been controlling his actions rather than psychological disorders originating within his own mind. However, Dr. Blackwood observed that the boy remained unusually sensitive to loud noises and sudden movements, suggesting that some effects of his ordeal persisted despite apparent recovery. Eleanor Hartwell's emergence from her withdrawn state proved the most gradual of the family's recoveries, with the woman slowly regaining awareness of her surroundings and reconnecting with her loved ones over several days following the exorcism. Her memory of the supernatural events remained fragmentary and disturbing, creating ongoing anxiety about the possibility of recurrence that affected her ability to resume normal activities. Dr. Blackwood's continued monitoring revealed persistent sleep disturbances and nervous symptoms that indicated lasting psychological impact from her experience. Catherine's return to normal childhood behavior was accompanied by complete loss of the precocious knowledge and adult mannerisms that had characterized her during the supernatural crisis. The 8-year-old's inability to remember her conversations with deceased relatives or her demonstrations of historical knowledge provided relief for her parents while raising questions about the nature of the entities that had used her as a communication conduit. Her recovery appeared complete, yet Dr. Blackwood remained concerned about potential long-term effects that might not manifest until later in her development. Thomas Hartwell's relief at his family's recovery was tempered by growing awareness of community suspicion and fear that threatened their continued residence in Whitmore County. Local residents' reactions to news of the exorcism ranged from supportive sympathy to superstitious avoidance, creating social isolation that made normal life increasingly difficult for the family. The farmer's practical concerns about maintaining his agricultural operations and providing for his family's future began to outweigh his attachment to the land that had been in his family for generations. Father O'Sullivan's departure from Whitmore County occurred within days of the exorcism's completion, with the priest expressing confidence in the procedure's success while warning about the importance of continued spiritual vigilance. His final consultations with Dr. Blackwood and Reverend Whitmore emphasized the need for ongoing religious observance and protection to prevent recurrence of supernatural influence. The priest's written report to church authorities, included among the discovered documents, provided official documentation of events that would influence ecclesiastical policy regarding similar cases for decades to come. Dr. Blackwood's own departure from Whitmore County in spring 1919 reflected his inability to reconcile his scientific training with the supernatural events he had witnessed and documented during the Hartwell case. The physician's final journal entries revealed a man whose fundamental understanding of reality had been permanently altered by his experience with phenomena that defied rational explanation. His decision to abandon his successful practice and relocate to a distant city suggested psychological trauma that paralleled the family's own struggle to recover from their ordeal. The Hartwell family's eventual departure from their ancestral farm occurred quietly in summer 1919, with local records indicating that they sold their property at a significant loss before disappearing from community knowledge entirely. Their destination remained unknown to neighbors and former friends, suggesting a deliberate attempt to escape the notoriety and suspicion that had made their continued residence impossible. The abandoned farmhouse stood empty for several years before being demolished, with local residents reporting ongoing supernatural disturbances that discouraged potential buyers. The historical significance of the Hartwell case extends beyond its immediate participants to encompass broader questions about the nature of reality and the limits of human understanding that continue to challenge observers nearly a century later. The careful documentation provided by Dr. Blackwood and other participants offers unique insight into phenomena that resist conventional explanation, while demonstrating the profound impact such experiences can have on individuals and communities. The ultimate fate of the Hartwell family remains unknown, leaving readers to draw their own conclusions about the effectiveness of spiritual intervention and the possibility of lasting resolution for those who encounter forces beyond normal human comprehension.